Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the February 8th, 2022 meeting of the Planning Board Short-Term Rental Subcommittee. If you'll give me just a moment here. We'll run through a document or two. We'll get rolling. Okay. For the purpose of Zoom call, we'll do a quick roll call attendance. Kyle Scott.
Present.
Russ Anderson.
Present.
Randy Brown.
Here.
Doug Moglen.
Here.
Rhett Banish.
Present.
Tom Fitzgerald.
Here.
Richard Utzinger.
Here.
And Pat Odion.
Here.
Okay, so that gives us the 8 current members of subcommittee. I have as item number 2 on our agenda an opportunity for introductions. We kind of held that over. We had a little hiccup last week with Mrs. Odiorn, and we also learned that one resident member was not able to participate. So before I hand things over to Pat for a brief introduction, I'll just mention that I did circle back with the planning board. We have distributed an outreach message via the newspaper, via the town clerk's postings and the town website, and also with assistance from Diane and Gail to help share that on Facebook for resident members to reach out to me if they're available to participate. I will refer that information back to the planning board as it comes in. I have 2 responses. We'll call it 1.5 so far, I think, but at least the opportunity is out there. And in short order, we're already getting some feedback. So that's encouraging. But Pat, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with the group, I guess how you became identified as a member of the subcommittee, and I guess what your thoughts are moving forward, why you wanted to participate.
My name is Pat Odiorn and I live on White Street on Middle Lake, and we have experienced personally the neighborhood disruption of having a B&B in our neighborhood. And I'm very grateful that this is going to be dealt with hopefully in a timely manner. And that's my reason for being here, and I'm grateful that I'm here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you participating. It's important to have a resident voice in these discussions, for sure. So, 3, with the formation of this committee, we need to establish a chair and a vice chair. And I will guide things as a courtesy for the time being, but happy to pass that torch as the group sees fit. So I suppose we will entertain a discussion for nominations this evening.
Utz is in Florida. He's a sitting duck.
Actually, yeah, Doug, I would do it. Doug, I'm dealing with some medical issues down here that from my wife. Not sure my time frame at all.
Okay.
Doug, I'd be glad to keep an eye on you if you want to do it.
I kind of got enough on the plate right now. And I think as a designee from the select board, I think it either should be the planning board or someone else should be the chair of said committee.
Second, like John. You mean, for example, with John?
I'm regrettably not a resident of South.
Oh, you can't. Okay, you can't be. Oh, okay.
So it should be a member of the sub, but it should be. I would suggest it wouldn't be me.
Thanks for the vote of confidence, Tom. I appreciate that.
I think a great
I was
idea.
going to second his too.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
I could try out for the assistant chair maybe, but I can't handle the responsibility time-wise for a chair. How are you, Randy?
If no one else wants it, I'll take it.
Oh,
All in
that's.
favor?
Aye.
Look
Hold
at
on.
that.
We have a motion
I
for,
tried to sit as quiet as I could, not move, and I guess I moved too much.
down here on a cold Tuesday night, just to avoid the bullets, but I think, so you have a motion, who seconded the motion besides everybody?
I did.
Tom Fitzgerald seconded the motion. And then, you do need to do a roll call vote.
That's right, we're on Zoom.
Because you're on Zoom.
Let me find that list and we'll go through.
Hey, guys, who made the motion?
I believe that was Mr. Rustinger.
Okay.
You may just call the roll.
Oh, yeah, I got it right here. All right, Kyle Scott,
Aye.
Russ Anderson,
Aye.
Randy Brown, there's no vote.
Aye. If I can vote.
Go for it. What do you say, Randy?
Aye.
Doug Mogul,
Aye.
Red Banish,
Aye.
Tom Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Richard Uttinger.
Aye.
Pat O'Donnell.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Congratulations, Mr. Brown.
Randy, you see in your paycheck, you see the difference.
I expect to.
Mr. Brown, is there anybody you would like to nominate for the role of vice chair?
Well, I think Mr. Utlinger threw his name in the ring, so I'll nominate Dick Utlinger for vice chair.
I'll second.
Roll call vote. Kyle Scott,
Aye.
Russ Anderson,
Aye.
Randy Brown,
Aye.
Mogul,
Aye.
Red Banish,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Dick Singer,
Aye.
and Pat. Okay.
Aye.
Wonderful, unanimous. So Randy Brown as chair, Dick Singer as vice chair.
Is everyone sworn in?
That's a good question.
Have you
I
sworn in?
have sworn in.
So the only one who's not is the vice chair, right? Because you're out of state.
Right, I should maybe take care of that Friday.
Fantastic.
All right, well, having said that much, that brings us to the opportunity for discussion.
I have to check. I sworn in about 3 other things recently, so I think I have.
Not at, in.
No, that too. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure I did when I after this.
All good.
Thank you, Mr. Mogul, for raising that important point. Nonetheless, this brings us to the point in our meeting where we have the opportunity to discuss both the need or the absence thereof for regulating short-term rentals. So I will open it up to group members to volunteer their thoughts.
I think it might help if someone maybe starts where this all originated from. You know, I know there were some complaints about White Street. Maybe Pat can explain her experience to the board, and then we can go from there.
If I can interject just for 1 second, because I actually had a conversation with Pat before this whole thing got started, because she had a couple of poor experiences with short-term rentals off of White Street, right? And she had reached out to me, and then I had reached out to the planning board to have a look at this, and had attended some, I believe it was at Mass Municipal probably 2 years ago, and then there was another Mass Municipal teleconference that was run about short-term rentals, and there was some state regulation that had come in for short-term rentals. So thank you for being kind on the timeliness, because COVID has kind of put us behind by about 1.5 years or so on having this subcommittee get together. But
Yeah.
so I think it's worth having a look at and a frank discussion as to if it's if we need to regulate it, and if we do regulate it, what regulations make sense. And since we started having just informal discussions, not in any meetings, but there's concerns from and why they're represented here. There was concerns from Board of Health. There was concern from public safety and fire specific. And then I think I shared the anecdote last meeting that even, we had a ruling from the zoning enforcement officer, Mr. Scott, that, according to zoning, if it's not in the bylaw as allowed, it's prohibited. That's the type of bylaw we have for zoning. So technically it's not permitted under zoning today, but fact of the matter is it is happening in town. And then I shared the anecdote last week that our own town contractor used a short-term rental agency or whatever, a website, to reserve a place for the guys that were doing the treatment on Congamon Lake. And they docked their boat at the short-term rental. And so, we were kind of complicit in violating our town's own zoning bylaw. But so I think it's worth having this conversation and putting forth what the experiences are and bringing in some of the, from the state and looking at what other surrounding towns or, nearby communities have taken on as far as what's involved, whether it's just straight up registration. This is not, from my perspective, to be clear, this is not a revenue generation activity, right? We just want to figure out another way to tax it. I think it's just a way to get a handle on it so that, people that buy in a residential subdivision or in a residential zone expect to deal with things that you deal with in a residential zone. And that's why you buy something in a residential zone. And so if there's something going on in the zone that changes that, we need to look at what the implications are to that and the safety and health stuff that come along with it. But that's my take on it. And then I'd love to turn it over to Pat to hear, because she's had direct experience with it. I know we had reached out to the police as well, and they haven't had a lot of negative experience with short-term rental. And I also meant, if I didn't send it to you, I think I did share, and we can distribute it if it hasn't been already. There was at the Mass Municipal Association event last week, they actually had they reviewed case law of stuff that had gone through the courts in the last year. One of them was short-term rentals and how they can or can't be regulated. And they were actually talking about a short-term rental, and there was actually a murder. Somebody rented the house, had a huge party, which is what happens sometimes with short-term rentals. They rent a place for the explicit purpose of having a large gathering, and there was actually a murder at one of these things. So, not to be the macabre guy, but part and parcel of the discussion. So, Pat, please.
Well, the people who who own the property next door to us, bought it from Art King, and they refurbished it, and for a while they had their daughter living there. They live in Westfield. They do not live in Southwood. And the daughter decided she didn't want to live there anymore, and the owner got hold of Airbnb as a sponsoring thing and put her info up on the net, and could rent by the night, by the week, by the month. And this is 2018. We had people coming one day, next day, another day, another day, another day, by the day. And we didn't know who they were. We didn't know anything about them at all. And they thought, most people think, well, it's the beach, So they would have bonfires out on the beach. And then the owners had a a fire pit that they had built. And over the course of time, the chief was kind enough to notice that it was too close to the dwelling, so that the fire pit can't be used. All right, so the people were told, not to use the fire pit. All right, and I went around to the neighborhood and I asked. The fires were what were bothering me, because it was during the summer. We always have our windows open, and the smoke comes in. So, we wanted to have them have some kind of adjustment on the fires. But I went to my neighbors and they complained about the noise. They had parties. One fellow down the street said there were these 3 or 4 ladies who came along the street, you know, yelling and singing and whatever. And he said to them, I have to work. This is not a party. This is working time, you know, be quiet. And, you know, they were all put out that they had been asked to be quiet because, of course, it was their vacation and they wanted to do their thing. So I collected signatures from the neighborhood and I brought it into the zoning enforcement officer. And he looked into the bylaws and looked and said that it wasn't allowed. So he sent a letter to the owners, and the owners they acknowledged that they had received it. And things were a little better after that. But the zoning fellow said that he wanted to wait until the state of Mass, Commonwealth of Mass, decided what they were going to do about short-term rentals. So the Commonwealth voted in summertime that instead of banning short-term rentals, they were going to register them so that they could get the revenue from the registration. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, so he came back. After that, I went in front of the planning board and I said, this is what the state decided. Can you figure out what short-term rental is? Is it a month? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? And I was told that they needed to go higher up to find out what was happening, what would happen. And that's where it's at. That's where it's at. So I'm very happy that we're going to talk about it and maybe get it straightened out. But if on the topic of the hiring of the guys that worked on the lake, if we say short-term rental is a month, then we're covered on that. If we say nothing less than a month, then we've covered the embarrassment of the.
Well, it was just, sorry to interrupt, it wasn't an embarrassment. It was ironic that, you know,
Yeah.
we were having a discussion about short-term rentals and sometimes one hand doesn't know what the other's doing. We hired a contractor and then the
Absolutely.
contractor goes and rents, you know, granted they're getting paid by the town, but
Absolutely
we
not.
didn't, you know,
Yeah.
it just, the irony of the situation was, and it happened to be the same property
Exactly.
that was subject to discussion in the past.
Yeah.
It is what it is, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
but that's a good point, though. I mean,
Yes,
we
I
have to
mean-
look at the state law from, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to dominate your discussion, but to, you know, to kind of have a definition, you know, maybe take a look at the state regulation too and distribute it to everyone so we can have a look at what that is and then, you know, fit anything that we do around that. Because even if you defined it to me, what is a short-term rental?
Right. Right.
Is that a week, a month,
Right.
more than 2 days? You know, I don't,
I
I'm sure the
saw
state has something to say.
that article that you sent, and it seemed like just recently, it seemed like they were doing short term as a month. And if we did a month and no less, defined it as one month and no less as short term, thou shalt not do anything less than a month, then that would maybe be sufficient. I mean, unless we want to just say no, we're not gonna allow any B&Bs.
If I might chime in with 2 cents here. I think if you put they will abuse it till the cows come home. You can put a month all you want. How do you police it? How do you, they're gonna do 15 days, oh, they had to cancel, their relative got sick. And they can give us any use in the book, the person renting property. We have no idea. I've been in a lot of communities now working as an inspector in zoning. And every community I've been in, it is very problematic. Some worse than others. I've had the multiple house party calls. I've had destruction of property. I cannot stress strongly enough, I don't feel any good comes from that. And I wouldn't want to have a nice house in South and have a person that just bought the house to turn it Airbnb. And this is actually happening today. People are buying these properties and they're just revenue from Airbnb. They have no intention of living in them. They have no intention of anything for their own use. They're turning them for Airbnb. And my opinion is we should have a total moratorium on it.
Mr.
Technically,
Chair,
don't,
Somebody said something,
said-
Mr. Chair.
You, Randy.
Go ahead, Dick. Were you speaking?
I was,
I'm down here in Florida and they have a lot of these down here, obviously, because of the water. I think we need to look at, are we gonna do the whole town? We're gonna divide the town by the lakes versus the whole town? Different situations for different people, number one. Number two, the situation down here, if the police are called for a disturbance, the homeowner is fined $500 every time they're called. So that's a thought we could look at that way too. But I think are we gonna look at the whole town as just one big thing? Or are we gonna say the lakes are one area because of the recreation and, the other part of town, something different? I don't know.
well, someone mentioned moratorium before. I thought, well, technically we have a moratorium right now where it's zoned. You can't do that activity. So in a sense, we already have a moratorium.
That's right. So we need to enforce it.
well, if I can, I mean, I think Tom's right. If it's according to the building inspector, zoning enforcement officer, sorry, if it's not in the bylaw, you can't do it. But it's also nigh impossible to police. I mean, is Kyle going to sit on Airbnb all day looking for short-term rentals in Southwick and driving over?
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, I looked at it too. I looked at it, that's a problem, right? Is how you get to that. And the other is, and someone did raise, I think it was Mr. Etzinger raised the point, and it to me, it's more, I have two thoughts. First, it is concerning in certain areas, especially not so much Southwick, but in other areas, Airbnb has driven people out of their homes or driven the prices of homes out of the reach of people that were going to buy those homes because the potential for rental income makes these investment properties, right? And so people leverage that Airbnb or Vrbo or any of those platforms as a source of income, and it impacts housing stock. I don't know that that's so much of a problem here in Southwick today, right? But that's something to consider. I know it's a problem in areas in some larger cities now where it is a real problem because the rental stock is now converted to condos that are now Airbnb or whatever, and certain low end or low to middle housing stock is unavailable. And the other is, I think, and maybe this is a counterpoint to all of this, is it's not permitted today. The state regulation is fairly new. There's still case law being developed on it. But keep in mind that there are people that are doing this, at least in the short term, or have, in short, careful when you change the rules of the game, after the game started, because that could have adverse impacts on people and unintended consequences. So we just need to be very, very deliberate how we do it, right? I don't know, I think we need to look at the state law and have a broader discussion and bring all the other aspects into this that we haven't even discussed yet. I'd love to hear more from Tom and the fire chief on those aspects of it too, is, how, what those impacts are, and see if it's all necessarily bad, or if it can be, I go back, we went back and looked at customary home occupation 20 years ago on the planning board. We used to have an outright prohibition except via special permit. So, because back in the day, if you had a customary home occupation, it wasn't like you were doing accounting or bookkeeping, or hell, for the last 2 years, a lot of us have been working from home, right? You were a welder, and that was one of them, by the way, or something else. So customary home occupation was banned in residential zones, right? And you had to go get a special permit from the planning board. And the planning board at the time, I thought it was pretty smart, and it wasn't my idea, we adopted a good neighbor policy. Home occupation was allowed by right, as long as you didn't alter the outward appearance of your home and your neighbors didn't complain, right? And so perhaps that's one way to look at this too, is if there's a way, and you could tie it in with Utzinger's idea, right? Is, okay, we can have some level of this short-term rental, and the landlord better know he's going to be on the hook $500 a crack if there's a problem, and we're serious about it. Maybe that would help, right? But then you can have what some people want to do. Some people love to visit Southwick. Short-term rental is not a bad idea. I mean, look at the Cape. Half the Cape is short-term rentals, right? And it does generally work out. So I just think we need to kind of take it holistically and look at it from, this is not a one meeting and done thing, but to kind of take a look at it holistically, like, yeah, there's going to be problem cases. How do you deal with them? And the same thing with customary home occupation. If someone has a customary home occupation and they're not bothering anybody, and it's not affecting the neighbors, and there's no smells or smoke or odors or traffic, right? And you're not affecting the outward appearance of your home. It's not detrimental to home values. Okay. But, then there's the other aspects to it where, you have, I've seen, and this is, I'll segue to the fire chief here, in other areas, I didn't see it as much on Airbnb when I was looking prior to this meeting, was when people start renting their basement, right? As an Airbnb, right? So you live up, then you rent the basement for the weekend. Now you've got a problem. God forbid there's something that happens there, and that living space was never intended, or that space was never intended as living space. What happens now, right? And we have a bad situation on our hands, right? So that's, I'd love to hear from the fire chief and then the Board of Health on this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have mixed emotions on it, in that we sell ourselves as a recreational community with a 400-acre lake, and people on both sides of the lake are doing this, but then how do you control it? And I respect your issues you've had that we've dealt with, but there should be an inspection process. There should be, a safety inspection process. We could limit outside pits to propane fire pits only, so there's no smoke issues. I mean, there's probably some things that we could do via quarterly inspections or something that have to be mandated, because darn well, someone's going to come in, they're going to start something on the stove, smoke detector is going to go off, they're going to take down the smoke detector, and then the next person moves in and there's no smoke detector. So I think if the process was to move forward, there would need to be some sort of inspection, whether it biannually, quarterly, whatever that should be. I think the fine idea is something you can sink your teeth into if you so choose to move forward with it. But I think there has to be a framework. If you're going to allow them, there needs to be a framework to protect the other people. I'm not sure how detailed we go with it or what other towns have done, but I just learned today that there's a car version of this as well. So they bought up all the people bought up cars and are renting cars out. So
Oh yeah,
that was news to me
Yeah.
too.
I can't think of the name of it right now, but
Yeah.
yes, you're right.
It's called Turo.
Oh, that's it.
That's-
Yep.
Yeah.
I think
Um,
also we need to look at the homeowner who's renting it. What does his insurance cover? You know, there's insurance liability, granted it's for the homeowner, but I think the insurance company needs to be made aware of these situations also. That their customer is renting property out.
That's actually a
Please.
new question that's on insurance policies. It says, do you have any of your home open for short-term rentals? And that's a question that has to be answered annually for insurance policies.
Okay, thank you.
I wonder if they answer truthfully.
Well, but it also, that gets into an area of other, is that the town's concern, right? I understand the public safety issue, right? Someone comes in, the smoke detectors are in up, or they rent the basement. That's a direct public safety issue, potential loss of life, right? You can, insurance, and not to minimize it, but I don't know that the town has standing if there's a loss and then someone civilly's got to come after someone else, whatever, personally or under their insurance. I get it. But that, it starts to go into a different, to me, a different realm. But
Well, they may not pay their insurance if the renter burns the house down.
correct,
Yeah.
but, and I didn't mean to, and I apologize, Randy, and I'm sorry but it's sometimes it's tough to see. Diane Gale had her hand raised a little while ago, and I wanted to make sure that.
Diane Gale, 5 Point Grove Road. I just want to say, state of Commonwealth of Mass, they define short term as 90 days or less, period.
Thank
Not
you.
more
I just saw one that
90
said
days.
31 days away.
I saw 28.
It takes Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I looked it up quick and it said 31 days. He saw 28.
Do I hear 47? And I'm sorry, Ms. Evans, we didn't get
Yeah.
your name for the
Yes.
minute.
Hi, my name is Amanda Evans. I actually just purchased a house a week ago and I'm moving into Berkshire Avenue. I am in the military, stationed at Bradley Air Guard Base for about 2 years. So I'm brand new to the community and I just wanted to join if you don't mind. And I do have a few comments to make if that's okay. I know I'm just general public, so I don't know if I'm allowed to, but
Please do.
is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay, so I agree with that the few bad eggs that are renting these houses definitely they ruin it for everybody else because there can be some benefit in having people like visitors come to the community and get to enjoy it. I definitely agree with, I think there's a second gentleman that just spoke that talked about if we made them register and we hold owners accountable. I think that's very important. And how you deal with problem cases, I think that fee that the gentleman in Florida said, the $500 fee if the police are called. I mean, if we have owners register, they know that they're liable, they have their insurance that covers it, and they know that they get a fee if their renters are unruly and disrespectful to neighbors, because that's very important. I've seen Airbnb communities provide some good. I've stayed at Airbnbs when I've traveled somewhere. And honestly, when I moved up here, I was looking for an Airbnb to stay at before I purchased a house. And I'm a commander of the mission support group at Bradley, Air Force Colonel, and we have troops that utilize these Airbnbs. Obviously, when they come here in official capacity, we pay for their hotel rooms. But for those that travel up here for unofficial, meaning their houses are far away, but they're on a long set of orders that we're not paying their housing, they choose to use Airbnbs. So there's a handful of airmen and officers that are using these, and hopefully they're all respectable tenants, right? So I'm just kind of listening in as a new neighbor. I mean, I think you guys said White Street. I think that's right down the street from Berkshire Avenue. So Pat, I need to meet you at some point. But I agree that there's some good in Airbnb with visitors, and like you said, it's not a profit generating thing, but if you do regulate it, charge a registration, you can even collect tax on the revenue, I think, from an Airbnb or a VRBO. But anyway, those are my 2 cents. I hate that a few bad eggs are ruining it, but Pat, I sympathize with you. If my next door neighbor had a big mansion and they were renting it out every day, that would be very frustrating to never know who's coming and going. So I just hope there's a way to find a happy medium where we can have people enjoy renting a place on the lakes. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay.
Amanda, first thing I'd like to say, I'm a lifelong resident of town. I am in Florida right now. I've been in town all my life. I'm retired Air National Guard out of Barnes Airport. And welcome to
Awesome.
town. Welcome to town.
Barnstormer, the commander up there is my friend. So good stuff.
Long
I'm
time
sure
ago.
you're enjoying Florida. It's a lot warmer than here.
Well, I'll be up there in a couple of days.
Oh, great.
Welcome to town, Amanda. I'll be in touch.
Thanks, Pat. I'm at 54 Berkshire, so I think I'm right up the way from White Street, if that's where you're at.
Not very far.
John, do we have anybody from town who's not on the board here who's interested in comments, or has that been pretty quiet?
Anybody who's expressed interest in becoming a resident member or contributing to the discussion?
Just contributing to the discussion, yes, or becoming a member?
I do have, excuse me, I'll bring up a little information. An out-of-town resident that maintains a house in town, and in the past has utilized it for short-term rental. Mentions that they oftentimes stay there themselves when they're in the area. And this is a scenario where I think they're embracing self-policing, if you will, of their end. So that was Miss Linda Tucker that had reached out, and I do have an inquiry from, gosh, I just lost another individual that reached out. Wanted to understand what the responsibilities might be, but a resident in town, and I'll share that with the planning board for them to consider potential membership. But that's what I have for feedback thus far, Ms. Justinger.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask Mr. Banish, Lieutenant Banish, sorry, Lieutenant Banish. Thoughts on this issue?
What do you want to know, Doug? My audio is going in and out here.
I said, do you have thoughts on this issue so far in practical experience from the police or personally?
Personally, no. I mean, from the police side, like I said, the last time we had dealt with that house down on White Street, it was an issue where it was called in as parking issues. So people were parking where, the residents down there felt they shouldn't. They were blocking the right of way coming up the hill. I believe we went down there, we dealt with it. I don't believe we really got any noise complaints or anything like that. I mean, if we do get such a thing, we've got options as far as what we can do. We can do what's called a disorderly keeper of a disorderly house. A lot of the college communities use that. It's like $1,000 fine, but it has to go through the court first. It's nothing we can just write a fine on. We could go disorderly person, disturbing the peace. I mean, those are probably our go-to stuff if we had to do something. Shy of coming up, obviously, with some form of bylaw to deal with this with a monetary fine on a town bylaw citation.
I'd like to add that I did not complain about the parking. It was somebody else. It was not I.
I guess one of the reasons I wanted to ask was typically with zoning, and I don't see how this, unless we do somehow this morphs into more of a regulation than a bylaw. The police typically are not big proponents of issuing zoning violation tickets. That's usually the zoning enforcement officer. And of a practical matter, the zoning enforcement officer works 8 to 5. So, how does that work on the weekends or, whatever, when probably the majority of these calls would happen?
Yeah.
So you're
That's
saying we
right.
can't call Kyle at 3 o'clock in the morning?
We try to refrain.
There's another aspect of when you call something short-term rental. You've got a 5-bedroom house. I've seen this happen numerous times when I was in Northampton. You've got 2 bedrooms rented for 2 weeks. You've got this one rented for 30 days. And the property can be cut up to a bunch of different rental periods.
Mm.
So,
That makes the wrinkle a lot more difficult to handle.
yeah.
Well, also, if you do think about doing any either regulations or a bylaw, once the town becomes involved, and I'm not saying it shouldn't, you have to understand that we need to be very cognizant of making sure that we don't expose ourselves to liability. In other words, if we were doing inspections, as the chief mentioned, we need to go full bore or not, because what's going to happen is if there's something, if we do an inspection and then something happens, they'll be looking at us, the town, and saying, you know, we didn't do our due diligence. So, for example, if they added bedrooms and it's over occupied and there's a fire or something like that, and we've inspected it, just if we got to be very careful if we're going to go down that road, that we go down it completely and protect the town from future liability.
Could we produce some sort of a form where the homeowner, when he's going to rent this unit, has to have it signed off by whatever authorities we feel it needs to be signed off by fire or safety or?
Yeah, I would think you would have a plan for the house that would lay out what they're doing, whether they're renting the whole house or whatever it might be.
How many bedrooms, they don't become over occupied. I was doing a little research on this last week, and I think Kyle could probably attest to this as well, that one of the problems they had nationally was overloading on decks, because people use it as a party house a lot of times. And then the structures typically aren't designed for number of people they're inviting over, you know. And so a lot of times it was issues where decks actually collapsed. So another reason why you would think about possibly having a inspection, multiple inspectors in before that's.
Anyway, look at it, it's an enforcement nightmare for the town. It's a total unpleasant task, because you're going to have numerous course of time, and people give you pushback. So even when you write tickets, we all know how that goes. You know, nothing's clean and neat. So.
I think we need to make it really black and white as what our goals or what our guidelines are going to be, so that when the unit is rented, the homeowner knows exactly the responsibilities, what inspections he or she needs, and you know the consequences if the police come, or you know, I think we need to put it in black and white, so there's no questionable areas. Like, well, maybe he didn't come look at it. He didn't come on Tuesday, came on Thursday or something like this, or hasn't been here for a week, and fire department was here 2 weeks ago, but they weren't here this week. So I think each time it's rented, I think we need to have, I would like to see like, almost like a building permit, you know, to come through and get it signed off on and let them pay to have the inspector come out and get it done.
Is the definition of a like a bed and breakfast, does that fall under a short-term rental, or is that separate from a zoning standpoint?
Different class.
So does the town allow bed and breakfast? No.
Even if they did,
being exactly what?
A bed and breakfast.
Chief, if somebody needs a battery in their smoke detector.
Other than Airbnb, a B&B means the person who owns it lives there and does overnight and breakfast for the people who are hiring their their building. That's a B and B. Airbnb is not legally an a B and B.
Very well.
It takes that name, but it's not.
I thought so.
Under home occupation.
Correct. It would be allowed in a different zone. If it was a pre-existing non-conforming structure in a business zone, it probably would be allowed, but I think I didn't want to speak to it because I don't remember. My memory's not as good as it used to be, but I thought we had this discussion many moons ago.
Yeah.
And do you remember if this is chapter 337 from Mass General Law of the acts for short-term rentals at the state level? I don't know if you looked it up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it 337? Ah, there it is. Okay. Inspector's here. It's not someone on Zoom. It's in the
No,
building.
It's here. It's on.
Oh, okay. Those things.
It's aliens from another planet.
Not like last night, we had air traffic control on the select board meeting.
I wasn't, when we first mobilized this spot, wasn't there someone assigned to this from Bacon and Wilson? It wasn't Ben, it was somebody else I thought came in,
David.
but I don't remember.
When we first talked about this, when it first came out, the law came out. Bacon Wilson.
Maybe that's what it was, the law
That's
came
what
out and
that-
they were
yeah,
trying
They
to.
responded to it. Yeah, that's what editor just gave to Doug.
And thank you for that, because this actually talks about just what was just mentioned, a bed and breakfast, private owner occupied home where 4 or more rooms are rented. Bed and breakfast, private owner occupied home, owner occupied house where not more than 3 rooms are rented. So, short-term rental, owner occupied, tenant occupied, or non-owner occupied property is not a hotel, motel, yada, 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 or bed and breakfast, where 1 room or unit is rented to an occupant. All accommodations are reserved in advance.
Mhm.
However, but it doesn't. And there's a ton of exemptions for that. But I was looking to see if short-term rentals rented for no more than 14 days in a calendar year, still required to register with the state and prove less than 14 days of rental. Community impact fees, Commonwealth excise. I'll have to read the bylaw and it's more in its entirety again to see where we get to 30 or 40 or
What it is.
interesting. Thank you. You're welcome. Do you have that somewhere?
I'm gonna,
Yeah.
gonna be happy to-
Just send, we could send that out.
Sure. Yeah.
thank you.
Randy, Gail's got a cramp in her arm.
Oh, I can't see. I can't see her.
All right, Randy.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to throw in some other comments before we close without my say. From a different perspective, I do see this as, despite the noise problems and smoke problems, I know there are always problems, but this could be a nice benefit for the town if we could advertise our recreational town. We might actually get some of the motocross people, for instance, coming in the winter to do lake activities if we were known as renting properties for the lakes for winter recreation. We could advertise, the motocross could put it in their own literature that they could find rental opportunities. People would come in before motocross and stay after motocross, and we would get more people coming into town for those opportunities. I think it does need regulation. It might be requiring no less than 2 days to limit the transient day by day participants. It might require the owner actually occupy the house for some period of time during the year, so they're not owners that actually have an interest in actually upkeep the property. I think there's some place in town that actually had cabins at one time. That could be revitalized for camping during the summer, bringing a whole bunch of families. So I think there are some good opportunities if we were known as a rental community as well, a vacation, but with mild regulation.
Excellent. So here's what I suggest we do moving forward is for our next meeting, let's get a copy of the Mass General Law and get some clarity on what a short-term rental is, whether it's a 28 days or 31 days or 90 days. It sounds like there's a memo from Bacon Wilson that we should get distributed to everybody. And maybe we can get some copies of other town bylaws or policies on this.
Yeah, I think the beauty of this is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's several, probably 100 communities in Commonwealth in the last 2 years have had to deal with this, and there's a lot of information that's been assembled and gone through. So I think by doing some due diligence and research on what other towns have gone through and the problems they've had, it's going to put us in good stead to make a reasonable approximation of how we can deal with this safely.
Yeah, so between myself and John, I think we can probably pull out information together and have that ready for the next meeting and continue this discussion here. Any other comments?
Thank
All right,
you.
I guess we want to talk about the next meeting dates?
Yeah, let's map that out.
What let's take a step back. What is the end game to this? I guess if it is a bylaw change, it would have to go to town meeting. We may be late in the game to get something on town meeting this spring, but certainly doable for next spring of 2023. Sounds like that's the path we're going down. Otherwise, that's probably that's the most likely path, I would say. So I guess that being said, we're not under an immediate time crunch, although it'd be nice to get something on paper here. You want to meet, say, once a month? Does that work for the group?
I would think so.
Got a fair number of nods over this end, Randy.
So we are on the second Tuesday of the month of February. You want to keep that same second Tuesday of March?
John, is that a planning board night?
I don't believe so. Nope, because we got 28 days in February, so we're in the clear.
Does planning board meet the first and third? Is that it? Or is it
That's
every other Thursday?
Someone called first and third. This is the way we've set up our calendar.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So March 8th, 7 o'clock.
There's no chance of getting this resolved before next year.
Well, I mean, I think you just got to march deliberately. And right now, there's no plan to have a special beyond the May. So if it gets to,
I think that would depend if we found community Z that had it all done already.
Yeah.
You know, does that help?
I don't think, I mean, the planning board would have to hold a proper public hearing on a zoning bylaw change. Then it would have to get on the warrant for the May town meeting. They had a gentleman in the other night to come and speak to the planning board about a potential modification of the parking bylaw. The planning board, frankly, has a pretty full plate of public hearings between now and early to mid-April, which is the deadline to get stuff on the town meeting warrant anyway. I don't think there's any chance of getting this onto a town meeting warrant for this May. But I think we can be deliberate, and if we come up with a work product that, it gets on a warrant, for a special that comes up, if there is one. We didn't have one this year, right? I don't know. We did not have a special this year, but we just get it in the queue so that when we're ready, we're able to do it.
Now, you talked earlier about a bylaw versus a regulation.
Correct?
What's the difference as far as
It's a totally different process, right? And I'd have to do a little more research on the regulation.
I can tell you that the Board of Health passes regulations which have the same legal standing as a bylaw. I do know that. Now, maybe you're talking about different regulations. Boards of health pass regulations.
I just wonder if it's a
Towns
quicker
pass
path and
bylaws.
you don't need a town meeting. I don't know if that's
Right,
true or not.
and we may have to figure that out, but if it's gonna amend zoning, because the current, and
Right.
I'll come right back to you, the current prohibition on, technical prohibition that we have in town is based on zoning. The zoning enforcement officer has said that based on his interpretation of zoning, it's not allowed. So if it were to be allowed by, I would imagine then something in zoning would have to be changed to permit it. You know, if we have a different opinion or there's a court case that changes that opinion,
Right,
then
right.
okay, then maybe a regulation, and Tom, you're right, and that, you know, like the Board of Selectmen have certain regulations that we also pass. I don't know that they have to go to town meeting or not. I'll have to do the research. I don't want to commit to that either way. But that they have the effect of law, like Tom says, but that's within the selectmen's purview to pass said regulation. But we also, the selectmen couldn't just say, oh, you can do this if it's prohibited by zoning, right? We can't do
Can't
something that's
overrule it.
contradictory to,
Right.
yeah, this law. And there's, you know, zoning bylaw, just, you know, a lot of people are familiar with it, but for those that aren't, this sub would then at some point recommend a course of action to the planning board, is I believe is our goal here. Whether it's a model bylaw or a draft of a bylaw, or nothing. We say, look, we're all set, right?
Mhm.
And then the planning board would then request the Board of Selectmen to send it back to the planning board to hold a public hearing, to put an article on a future town meeting for consideration by the voters, which would need a 2/3 majority at town meeting to change the zoning.
Which could go either way.
Which could go either way. All your work could be for naught. I mean, it's not the first time a zone change or a
Right.
zoning bylaw amendment failed at town meeting. And so it has to be compelling and it has to be, you know, suitable for the voters of the town.
So should we be more complaining people while this is happening? Complain to the
You can,
complain to the zoning or complain to the police?
if it's
Or
problematic, I mean, I guess I see your point, but I think you have to look at it from, Bob Johnson, who served with me on the planning board, he's a pragmatic guy, still is a good neighbor policy, right? If someone was doing this and it wasn't obtrusive at this point, right? I understand there's other things at play here that we need to be concerned about, but if it's going on now and it's unobtrusive, I don't know that we want to be the Airbnb police, right? That, oh, this guy's renting this house, I'm calling the building inspector because I saw this on Airbnb. I don't know that that's actionable, other than sending a letter to the guy saying these are prohibited in the town of Southwick today. And then we'd have to look at the case law and see if that's even appropriate.
No, I get it. It's Pandora's box in a lot of ways.
But, and the gentleman that came into the planning board last week, right? You know, he was mighty disappointed when he was explaining the process, right? It's not we're going to have 2 meetings, we're going to have a bylaw and this is done. It's just not how it's just not how it works. The process is laborious and there's public input and there's a public hearing and it's intended to take, like I wrote down a bunch of stuff tonight, just having this discussion amongst us. And from Ms. Evans, Ms. Gale, there's some good points on this, good pro and con for this. So I think we have to take that all into account. If this sub wanted to send a recommendation right back to the planning board to say right now that we should, it's banned, forget it, we're done. There's just too much wrong with it that we couldn't do it. And let the planning board take it from there and either go with what the building inspector, the zoning enforcement officer has said, and we try to enforce the hell out of it, or do we come up with a common sense set of regulation that tries to mitigate the bad and leverage the good? Ms. Gale made some positive points. Ms. Evans made some positive points on why it might be beneficial. I think that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, moving on to any other routine business to talk about? I do have one question for you, John. We are down a member on the committee. I think you mentioned you have some interest from 1.5 candidates. Does planning board appoint that individual, and will they do that at the next meeting?
Yes, they will. They're responsible to appoint. I will present this information to them, but I can say that even past hour we've been discussing, I got an email. We're down to 1/2 candidate. So we will. I hope that we get some additional interested individuals reaching out.
What did our discussion scare them away?
No, it's only be blamed on my correspondence. Talking about the discussion here.
So when does planning board need to have those resumes by, or those letters of interest by, just so we can let everyone know who's on the call and listening in?
So let's see. Our next meeting is on the 15th. So anybody who listens this between now and then, if you can reach out to me, J Goddard, Goddard at southwickma.net, or you can leave a message at 413-569-6056. Happy to pass along any information, entertain any questions that may come up. It is right now an open, well, let's say invitation for people to reach out and express some interest. That ad is running again in a week's time. But by next Tuesday would be the opportunity for us to discuss with the planning board. And then 2 weeks after that again.
Sean, do I need to resubmit?
I don't think you need to. I mean, I'm more than willing to keep your hat in the ring. So to be fair, Randy, just to reiterate that Diane did volunteer at the last meeting. At the planning board session, planning board chair recognized that Diane is involved in a number of things and didn't think it was fair to, if you will, just throw her right into this. But certainly we'll see what sort of feedback comes back. I don't know, feedback, I should say, what sort of fruit the outreach effort bears in the interim. So I don't see any reason why we still can't consider Ms. Gale's offer at the planning board level.
Yeah,
Okay.
to be fair, Mr. Chairman, at the end of the last meeting, Diane volunteered to be on the board on the sub, and the planning board chair said, great, but let's make sure we say, and put it out there that anybody wants to submit a letter of interest, and then the planning board will choose to appoint, rather than just saying, oh, because Diane was here and we just did it. It was nothing personal against Ms. Gale. I don't want it to seem that way. It was just from what I saw from the planning board chair. You want to make sure that we have adequate time to post it, that there's a spot available. And we had 3 people come out and they put 3 more people on this sub, whatever. Right, because what are we at, 8 now?
We're at 8 now, yes.
So that's no good for breaking a tie.
Okay, perfect. Anything else before we adjourn for the night? Now's your last chance.
And I think you need a motion to adjourn.
All right, you want to make that motion there, Dick?
I'll make the motion to adjourn the meeting
Until
until March 8th.
Pat seconded.
all right, we can do this verbally, right? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.